morning, everyone. This is Jackie Luqman,
Luqman.
and we are very pleased to be joined this morning with the uh, Green Party candidate for governor who's running in New Jersey, and that is Seth Kaper-Dale. Morning, Seth.
Hey, Seth. Good morning.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Nation.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We've had an interesting time trying to get the interview scheduled because there's been so much stuff going on, obviously, with you and your running mate, Lisa Durden, who's running on with you for lieutenant governor, and with us because of all of the stuff that's been going on in politics with the DNC. And we're going to get to that juicy stuff. But we want people to know who you are, because we have always said with the Green Party that the Green Party, we think, is at a perfect moment in time to make a lot of inroads in politics and become more visible. But part of the problem is the Green Party doesn't have the money of either of the major political parties. They don't have the infrastructure, don't have the apparatus. So that's why we exist. That's why independent media is here, so we can introduce people to alternative candidates and alternative parties. So tell us who Seth Kaper-Dale is.
All right. So again, thanks for having me this morning. My wife and I are pastors of a church in Highland Park, New Jersey, and we are community organizers. And we've been here for 16 years. I took a church that had 35 people, and they were all white when I got here, to being a church that's got about 500 active members now, and we have 55 nations represented through first-generation immigrants, as well as tremendous racial and ethnic diversity from those who've been here for many generations. So in 16 years, we've seen a dramatic transformation of our congregation. Building, we have about 3,500 people a week. Doing anything that's beautiful. I always say that that's why churches and faith communities ought to exist, that these spaces within communities can be filled with things that are beautiful. So whether it's yoga or a dance school or an AA meeting or an after-school program or a refugee-run cafe or a reentry program that we have that goes on here, or a whole housing corporation. We have 23 buildings and 125 tenants, by the way, through our housing corporation. All these things are happening in and through this active community. So that's what I've been up to the past 16 years. And as I've done that work, I have seen more and more the structural injustice in the state of New Jersey. And while I've grown better and better at administrating solutions, almost like pilot program solutions to some of the issues, it's been frustrating to see that the problems grow faster than the pilot project solutions.
Wow.
And at some point you realize I could fight this forever, and it's important for the people who are served through our reentry program and who are served through our housing for homeless veterans and served through all these things. But it's not going to change the dynamics of a broken world. We have to once in a while not only throw stones at tanks, we got to step into those tanks and beat them into plowshares and pruning hooks. And that's why I decided to run for governor, to step into the places of power and to transform the way those places of power work.
And while we're having this discussion, I just want to let our live viewers know that if you want to ask questions for our guests, please use the chat, and we'll get those questions out to you. So why the Green Party? Why not the Democratic Party or any other party? Why the Green Party?
So first of all, I was a Democrat my whole life because my parents were Democrats. It's one of those things, and also because compared to the Republicans, I had always felt like usually when I looked at two candidates side by side, I had more in common with the Democrat than the Republican, and I never could see past that. Oftentimes I said I was choosing the lesser of two evils. I recognized that I wasn't making a good choice. I was making the better of two choices. But 4 years ago, the Democrats finally had a candidate running who was not a Wall Street exec, who was not deeply tied to the political insider game, and that was Barbara Buono. And she won the primary. And between the primary and the November election, I watched Democratic bosses and 60 elected Democratic assembly members and senators work to undo her by publicly endorsing 4 more years of Chris Christie.
Wow.
Chris Christie had established himself as an ultimate bully. He'd made public school teachers out to be public enemy number one. He'd done things that were horrific. And to watch the Democratic Party side with him over somebody who was just a good person, had experience in the Assembly and Senate, but who was not deeply tied to anybody's money or anything, it just showed me how cynical this party was, and how really they weren't on the side of the people. So I decided 4 years ago I'm not voting Democrat again, not in the state of New Jersey, not at the state level anyway. And then back in August of this year, and I should say too, I started thinking about running for governor around that time.
Okay.
Then back in August of this past year, September, I watched the other possible Democratic frontrunners all fall away before the primary season started, and I watched every county boss, and we have bosses, and they use the title bosses. Every county boss had endorsed a Goldman Sachs candidate in the year of Bernie Sanders. And I thought, if Bernie Sanders for the state of New Jersey to endorse a Goldman Sachs exec who's nearly a billionaire was just totally out of touch with the Democratic voters. And so at that moment I said, I'm running for governor, and I'm running not as a Democrat. I'm going to run as a Green. And I had come to really appreciate the Greens through the Jill Stein campaign, and the mantra of people, planet, and peace over profit. People, planet, peace over profit. I mean, you could just say that in your sleep and believe every word of that. And you knew how different that was than the Democratic Party in the state of New Jersey and in the country for that matter.
So let me ask you about this past 2016 election, where the Green Party on a national level garnered a whole lot of attention. Jill Stein and Ajamu Baraka did this great speaking tour. They were involved in all of the protests just about surrounding the DNC. They were at the convention, the Democratic National Committee convention in Philadelphia. We were there. So it was like the Green Party was able to use this unique period of time in American political history to raise its profile, so that you have many more people knowledgeable about the Green Party and interested in the Green Party than people were before, and probably than they would have been had we not realized, had more people not realized, wait, there's something wrong with our electoral process. So, what, in your estimation, what have been the good takeaways from that I don't know what to call it, that seminal summer from Philadelphia especially, and what are some of the lessons learned that local Green Party candidates need to do better in order to win on the local level?
Well, there's a lot there in what you just said. So let me try to let me just try to tackle that. First of all, I think you summed up really well what happened last summer, and specifically the benefits to the Green Party, and frankly the ways the Green Party benefited the moment. It was going both ways, right?
Right.
There was something for the Greens to gain, and there was something for the moment to gain by the presence of the Greens. So I think that one of the things is being part of the protest is a big deal. To have a party that does stand with the last, that does stand with those who are left out. Jill and Ajamu weren't using the phrase "the last are first," but they were living the last are first through the ways that they stood with those who are being left out. I think, interestingly, this is a moment for the Green Party to become black in terms of representing African Americans in this country. I think that by standing with those who've been left out of the structures, and by doing that in such a national way, this might be a moment for African Americans who have voted line A all the way for a long time to see that, wait a minute, we had a Bernie guy who was unbelievable, who understood structural racism, who understood structural economic injustice, and they blew him off. They party that was aware that that was going to happen, that was ready to say, no, we're moving forward anyway. I think it's a moment for the diversification economically and racially of the Green Party. And to be honest, if the Green Party doesn't become a party that represents marginalized communities, it will never make a difference. But if it becomes the party that is the party of the marginalized, it could become the strongest source of any party in this country for two reasons. One, because passion is there. And two, because the numbers are there. I'm running this campaign in the state of New Jersey, the last are first, both because I believe that message. In my church, we say every Sunday, the last shall be first and the first shall be last. And yet when I walk outside, the first are first, the first are first. Always.
Right.
That's why it's the last are first. But it's not only the right thing to do morally, it's also where the numbers are. The amount of people who are structurally left out is growing rapidly all the time. The gap between those who are the haves and the have-nots is larger and larger, and there are fewer and fewer at the top. That's what Bernie was pointing out. If we together collectively can become a movement, we could take over this political system from the people. The people have to start seeing themselves as the majority, and we have to recognize that both the D's and the R's are happy to live among the 1% and 2% for the most part, or to keep giving the blessings to the 1% and 2%. I think this is the moment for the Greens.
Well, Mr. Dale, now you're coming into my territory. I'm so glad to hear that. And no offense to you, but the black community, we have heard that type of talk before, coming from the Democrats and coming from others. Now, Jackie and I, we were just in my home city of Camden just this past weekend. And you had Camden, Newark, Jersey City, Trenton, Atlantic City. A lot of these communities are being gentrified, and the people are being left out. Now, I'll focus on Camden because that's my hometown. When we were up there, I mean, the disparities between the haves and the have-nots. I mean, it's just blaring, And so, as governor, what policies would you put in place to address those type of things?
Yeah. So I can answer this in a million ways. Let me start with one that I think is specific to meeting gentrification at the crossroads right now, and that's, I believe in community land trusts. I believe that right now in a place like Camden, big developers are just waiting for a street to go down so far that it's at the place where the whole block or the whole bunch of blocks can be bought up and changed into something giant and gentrified.
Right.
I think community land trusts should look like little cubes of land spread throughout communities that prevent that from happening. So that as a block begins to go down, a community land trust comes to own a particular number of properties within a block. In that way, preventing it from becoming a block that will go all the way down and then become easy pickings for some for-profit giant. So community land trust as a blocker to gentrification is just, that's one specific thing. But there's some bigger things that'll prevent gentrification too, and that is an economic revolution. If there's real money among all of us, then there's less of a chance that we're going to have gentrification happen. So single-payer Medicare for all is the biggest missing piece from the political conversation between the duopoly here in New Jersey. Neither of the candidates will even touch it. The one time that the Democrat mentioned it, it was just to say, hey, we spend $80 billion a year on health-related costs in New Jersey. That's double the size of the budget. We can't talk about that. And I'm like, what are you talking about? We can't talk about it. We're spending $80 billion, and 33 cents on every dollar of that is going to overhead and profit for unnecessary overhead and profit because we don't have single payer. That's exactly what we should be talking about. There's about $19 billion a year that would be coming back into community, and it would be coming back in all sorts of forms. It would bring down property taxes, which would keep rents lower. Right now, rents are out of control because property taxes are out of control. So poor people suffer from rents that they can't afford because landlords are passing it on through to them. If businesses had somebody else other than themselves having to cover the for-profit health insurance industry, and instead we had single payer, businesses would be hiring more workers, and they would be paying a $15 minimum wage without a problem. But right now in the state of New Jersey, businesses are right to be frightened a little bit of a 15 minimum wage, because they might also have a 25% increase next year in their health insurance benefits to some for-profit company. So across the board, the poverty that we're experiencing in cities could really begin to be lifted through single-payer Medicare for all. The job sectors, all of them could be positively impacted by single-payer Medicare for all. And I think that that's a big piece of this when it comes to gentrification. The Goldman Sachs candidate Democrat, for example, he's pushing hard to make Newark the Silicon Valley of the East, or New Jersey, but Newark in particular. So what's he doing? He's got his Democrats on the ground right now coming up with all sorts of new zoning laws that allow for 45-story high-rise apartments along the river, where up until recently, that's where poor people have been living. They're going to tear down those tenement housing units, and instead of building better low-income housing, they're going to put these gigantic high-rises that bring people in from the outside for the new Silicon Valley of the East, which will help that one sector and maybe trickle a little bit into other sectors. But it's not something like single-payer Medicare, which would automatically help every sector to increase more jobs. And something that helps every sector has a much better chance of helping all the people.
Wow. I mean, those are the kinds of just common sense, real world, no pie in the sky solutions that all struggling people want to hear, but especially people of color. I mean, because a lot of times we'll get Democratic or Republican candidates who will come and talk to our communities, and they'll talk to esoteric issues, right? They'll talk about family value. We always hear the family values. You know, we always hear education is the key. We always hear about personal responsibility. And you know, from the Obama administration, we heard a whole lot of, you know, be responsible, and there, you know, nobody can make excuses anymore. And, you know, it was sort of the GOP respectability doctrine light, really, was what we got from Obama. And then, you know, so we've been looking for politicians, and not just recently, but forever. Since we have been allowed to be involved in the political process, we've been looking for politicians who not only speak to the issues that we deal with every day, but who also have solutions that we can partner with, right? And the community land trust, that's something people in the community can look at and say, oh, well, we can help to make that come about. We don't have to just sit around and wait to see if someone is going to fulfill their promise. That sounds like something people would say, oh, well, how can we help?
Right.
And that is what most people, regardless of their income level, that's what most people want. Most people want full participation in the health of their community. And it sounds like, at least in New Jersey, that's what you guys are pushing for.
That is what we're pushing for. We are pushing what I would call a truly progressive agenda, as opposed to a bourgeois liberal agenda. And we need to get to that point where we can identify the difference between a progressive agenda and a liberal agenda. A liberal agenda comes from people who aren't usually suffering and aren't in touch with people who are suffering, and it involves some sort of we're gonna increase some funding on some safety net programs. And don't get me wrong, I'm not against funding safety net programs, but if that's the best you can do, if that's what it means to be liberal, I don't want to be a liberal. I want a revolution. I want something that's dramatically going to change structures. And most of the bourgeois liberals say, well, let's just make sure we put a little more money in the housing voucher fund, or let's make sure we put a little more money in this or that. Give people the sense that they got a little more from us, but not really give people a sense that this whole world could be turned upside down. So I don't believe in trickle down money, trickle down programs, trickle down anything. What I believe in is a wellspring from below. And until we get to that place where we start at the bottom and go back to the top, we're not really going to change things. And it's about power too. I mean, it's not just saying the last are first in terms of receiving resources. It's about saying if the last receive resources that they need, they will become first. They won't stay last for very long. That's the whole idea. And I've seen it in my ministries, with women aging out of foster care. We have 7 apartments on the roof of my church. Women move in there after having been bounced around the foster care system as children or group homes, and then they end up getting 4 stable years living on my church roof in an apartment that they're paying $100 a month for. Okay. By the time they leave, they've had a whole network of people who help them find a job, help them with their resume, help them through school. If they have had absence in some piece of the educational system because they've been bounced around, we've got tutors who help them out. By the time they leave, where are they able to rent apartments? In my own town, a town that they wouldn't have been able to afford before they moved into this place. The last had become first.
Mm. Well, speaking of education, once again, using Camden as the focal point, Camden school board system has been under state control for as long as I can remember. My high school, my former high school, is now under plans to be being demolished, and a lot of the public schools are closing, and for charter schools, and they're promoting charter schools, and a lot of poor parents in Camden are feeling left out. Statewide, what are your plans for education? Will you return? Will you give Camden back its autonomy when it comes to education?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let me answer each piece of that.
Okay.
First of all, yes, I will give Camden back its autonomy. And I don't know the process of undoing what's been done by different orders from the past, but I would work hard to make that happen. State takeovers are never something that actually benefits the community. They're a bad idea.
Oh, we've seen that.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that every local area is without problems either. I've had other people say, be careful how you say that. There's some local folks who, if they got full control, would do damage too. So there has to be thought about this, but I don't like the idea of state takeovers. Secondly, I want to get serious about redistricting. And one of the things that I've committed to is, if elected governor, I want to come up with a black ribbon panel, I'm calling it. You always hear about blue ribbon panels, but I want a black ribbon panel that firstly starts with black issues in the state. And I believe redistricting would be one of the very first conversations. Our state looks like Plessy versus Ferguson is the law of the land. It's separate but equal all the way around.
Mm-hmm.
It's as if Brown versus Board of Education never happened. We have 615 school districts. The state of Florida has 73 school districts. There's a problem there. And apartheid is expensive. Why are the taxes so high in New Jersey? Because everybody wants home rule. And what that really means is rich towns want home rule so that they can keep their town very, very white and very, very rich. They don't want to deal with the Mount Laurel agreements from 1976, which by now would have added 450,000 affordable homes in every community in New Jersey, spread out in every community. Instead, they've tied that up in litigation. Those same towns that tie up the housing laws in litigation are the same towns that get mad when lots of money gets pumped into the public school system in the Abbott districts. It's just this cynical behavior of wealthy people is disgusting. So redistricting needs to happen so that we stop saying that our zip code equals what school we go to.
Mm-hmm.
We got to deal with that firstly. A lot of the reasons why the charter situation, I think we have to be careful with it. It's easy to be just like deaf on charters, down with charters, and I have played that part myself. And I would want a moratorium on charters while we figure things out. And I definitely don't want for-profit charters. And I definitely want democratically elected school boards of any existing charter.
Mm-hmm.
And I want teachers held to the same standards as public teachers. So I want to just say that. But I do think that you have the charter issue because of the deeper injustices of our districting. And that some families, I remember talking to a pastor recently who said to me, and this was an African-American pastor in Newark, who said, Seth, if your 3 daughters had the choice to go to a brand new school building that's on your block, that has all of the new technologies, and it's a charter, or to go to an underfunded, incredibly crowded public school where 83% of the kids are 200% of the federal poverty level, where would you send them? He said, until you can answer that question honestly, don't be too critical of charters. And I had to just stop myself and say, before we fight neighbor versus neighbor around the charter versus public conversation, it's the folks upstream who are keeping the money from getting where it needs to get, who are getting neighbors fighting neighbors on these questions. So a lot of the people who end up sending their kids to charters, they love their kids, they love their communities, and they want good education. And so I want to get away from the fight between charter and public on the ground. I want to be fighting with the state. I want to be the state to make sure that there's full funding of the formula that was approved in 2009 by the courts. That's never been funded since it was. The school funding formula has been underfunded since the year it was formed. If we were funding the schools the way they were supposed to, we wouldn't have nearly the problems that we have, and there wouldn't be this need for people to kind of get scared and start forming charters. So.
Now, Mr. Dale, one more question. What are your views with large corporations going to poor communities like Camden and basically not paying taxes? I mean, to be able to set up shop in Camden, not provide any jobs, but at the same time receive millions of dollars in tax benefits.
I hate that. For a state that complains about the high cost of welfare to provide for folks in need, the state has no trouble handing out corporate welfare right and left. Nearly $1 billion was handed out during the last 4 years of Chris Christie in tax abatements to companies, not just to get companies to come to Jersey, but for any company that kind of threatened to move out because of the high cost. They basically just had to say, hey, we're going to move out, and be like, oh, okay, tax abatement, you don't have to pay anything for the next however many years. It's terrible, and especially when folks aren't hiring people inside. So Camden's a great example. You've got a ton of people without work, you've got tons of corporations that have received these abatements, and they're not hiring the people who don't have work in Camden. So I don't like corporate welfare at all. Let me give you a little example, though, of how different we could treat big corporations.
Okay.
So have you been paying attention to the Amazon? Yes. Like, where's Amazon going to land?
Yes.
So New Jersey has offered $7 billion in tax abatements to the richest company in our country in order to come to New Jersey. Somebody's done the math and decided that 50,000 new jobs is worth it, and we give them $7 billion in abatements. I think that's terrible.
That's ridiculous.
So it would be the most tax abatements that any company has ever received in the history of our country to come to place. Don't quote me on that. It may be the second most, but I'm pretty sure
it's bad.
So we're assuming that as governor, you wouldn't allow a deal like that to go through.
No, but this is what I would say. I would say to Jeff Bezos, I'd say, Jeff, as long as you treat your workers right, we'd welcome you coming to New Jersey, and this is what we have to offer you. We can offer you single-payer Medicare for all in the state of New Jersey. And you'll know, Jeff, instead of 15 to 18% of your budget going to pay for the health insurance of your employees, you'd be paying a 6% payroll tax, like every employer pays, toward the New Jersey single-payer Medicare for all. So, Jeff, you'd have a tremendous savings, which means, Jeff, that your minimum wage should be way higher than whatever it would have been. You ought to be able to pay much better wages. And it means, Jeff, that every subsidiary company that will grow up around your new company being here, the hairdresser and the nail people and the restaurants and the coffee shops, everyone will also benefit from that same benefit that you benefited from. So the entire system enjoys the same benefit. So Jeff Bezos, come to New Jersey, because we have a system set up where we want business to thrive and where we want business to not be paying exorbitant cost of for-profit private health insurance. We want everyone to get great health care. All your workers, Jeff, will be healthier, and their families will be healthier.
That's right.
Take days off to care for their sick relatives who don't have health insurance, because everyone will have it. So that's what I would say to Jeff Bezos. And I actually wrote an open letter that nobody would publish a few weeks ago along those lines. So
we'll publish it.
Yep.
We will. Yeah, please send it to us. We will publish it.
and I know I promised that with my last, but I got one more. Across this nation, we've been experiencing this opioid crisis, this opioid epidemic. New Jersey definitely been hit hard by it. And I know that's under, the healthcare system. And I want to tie this in with crime too. New Jersey's crime has been going down, but as we said, in pockets like Newark and Camden and other areas, it still remains kind of high. So, what would be your plans on dealing with this opioid crisis, and what are your plans for dealing with these pockets of crime that still exist in these areas?
Okay, can I hit sort of a couple other topics as part of that as well?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, all right. So first of all, I do believe in the legalization of marijuana. I want to start there, and I'll move back into the opioids in a minute.
Okay.
One of the things that I've learned by listening to people on the streets is a lot of the tension between police and community has to do with this difference of opinion about what pot is, and so if we had marijuana be legalized, that would cut down a lot on the violence or the policing, the way that policing carries out things negatively within Black communities and within marginalized communities in our urban areas. So I believe in the legalization of marijuana. I also believe that when it becomes legalized, we have to make sure that Goldman Sachs guy doesn't get his hands on it and turn it into all white business. So we go from having it be something that's broken up Black families for 50 years and locked people up and then had them come out with records that makes it hard to get work and basically devastated a tremendous number of families. Now in one day it becomes a white boy's dream of big bucks for a huge industry, right?
Colorado.
So we have plans to make sure that dispensaries are firstly offered to communities that have been most negatively impacted by the way that marijuana has been treated up till now. So that's just something I wanted to offer up, and I think it will change something about the relationship between police and communities. So that's sort of a creative solution and one that we really believe in. In terms of opioids, I always remind folks when I'm talking that the opioid epidemic is nothing new. We've had an opioid epidemic, and it has hurt marginalized communities for a very long time. And folks were very happy to keep it as a criminalized thing instead of a health-related thing. And I just want to acknowledge that while I want to treat it as a health thing now, and I don't just always want to be looking in the past, at least among the people I'm meeting on this campaign trail, there's a lot of hurt feelings, deeply hurt feelings in marginalized communities who say, gosh, they weren't talking about it as a health issue when my mom was locked up.
Right.
So I want to acknowledge that not until it became a white issue did this become a health issue. I want to make sure that as we deal with the opioid crisis, we don't come up with another form of incarcerating marginalized people. And I say that I'll give a little bit of props to Governor Christie for recognizing and the severity of this issue and for highlighting it on the national stage. Let me give credit where credit's due. But at the same time, I'm really afraid that mandatory treatment is going to, where you're actually basically locked up for treatment, is going to be locked up for treatment if you're Black, and it's going to be you're not locked up for treatment if you're white, because you'll have a lawyer who gets you out of mandatory treatment if you're wealthy enough to get yourself out of mandatory treatment. And I really think that, as the prison population is reduced, mass incarceration is reduced, we have to be really careful that a whole new industry, for-profit industry, doesn't get created around mandatory treatment. I believe that that should be called jail. Anything that's mandatory treatment given by the courts, we just have to make sure that there's no profit motive in there at all. As somebody who visits immigrants and asylees in detention regularly at Geo Corporation-owned detention centers and at CCA-owned detention centers, private companies, on Wall Street companies that go through the roof even when everything else is falling apart. My biggest fear is that GeoCorp or CCA will be capitalizing on the fact that they can make money off the opioid crisis. And if somebody's making money off it, they'll make sure they keep that crisis going.
Right.
And they will keep making sure that the things that are hurting our community keep getting into the community. They might get it out of the white community, but they're not going to get it out of marginalized communities. And I really think we need to watch carefully and make sure we don't have another war on drugs that has, like, it sounds good at the surface level for a minute until you realize what's actually behind it. So I've got a lot of skepticism about it. Single payer Medicare for all is a great way to deal with the opioid epidemic and to start without any profit motive whatsoever. Add the kind of treatment options, add the kind of education options, add the mental health services that people need before they get into an opioid issue. These are things that really matter. And also, if, as we have a more careful eye on the drug companies do single payer Medicare, it can cut down on things like overprescribing and inappropriate prescriptions for people as well.
Wow. I mean, I know we are out of time because I know you've got another commitment.
I do.
But we really do thank you for taking the time to be with us today. And please know that this is not going to be the last time we reach out to you, because your work, before you even got into politics, is so appealing to us. Your work as a man of faith and how you worked with your community as a community organizer, as a man of faith. Yeah, that's our thing too. So we really do appreciate that you spent time with us in Luqman Nation this morning. Tell us in the last moments what people can do to support your campaign and when they need to go vote.
Okay, so to support my campaign, go to CaperDaleForGovernor.com. The best would be CaperDaleForGovernor.com. That's KaperDaleForGovernor.com/donate. Go to that spot. That would be, I got 4 days left. Yeah, that would be great. But the other thing to do is just to go on there, and you could, if you're interested in making phone calls, we have an incredible phone banking thing going on. We're not paying any huge firm to send out robocalls. We've got real people with real voices calling lists of folks who are Bernie voters, who are Greens, who are names that we collected through 300 plus moments of street work, which I've done this year, just out in communities. This is who we're calling and telling them to get to the polls. The polls it's open from 6 a.m. on November 7th at every polling station, and by November 7th at night, I'm hoping we're going to surprise this state by letting them see just how strong the last or first platform is.
Man, thank you very, very much for joining us, Seth, and we look forward to supporting you however we can, not just up to the 7th, but afterward too.
Thanks. And I really do hope that you get to talk to Lisa Durden, my lieutenant governor, who has been, as she'll tell you, she says she's the poster child for the last or first. And that when she heard those words, the last or first, as a woman who grew up in Newark and has experienced a lot of the structural violence that has been thrown at Newark and other urban areas for many, many years, she thought this is a campaign I want to be part of. So hopefully you'll get to talk to her before that.
Excellent. Thank you so much, and have a great day.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye. Thanks, everyone. Bye.